Hey, seventh graders. How's it going? Today's Wednesday, April 22nd. We are going to be continuing our discussion on World War One this week. All you need to do is read chapter 23 online, or I think it's chapter 8 in your books on World War One. That's our goal. And then at the end of the week, if you could write a quick little summary of our your learning, what you've learned this week. We'll just do one narration at the end of the week. That would be great. All right, so today I want to focus on our U.S. involvement in World War One. We said that it took us a while to get involved in it. Eventually, after the Zimmerman letter note, we found that Germany was conspiring maybe with Mexico. So we thought, oh, we need to get into the war. They are destroying our ships too, so we need to get involved. And so we do. But before that, I want to also make mention of the Russian Revolution. I know you seventh graders love your communists, so I have to talk a little bit about the Russian Revolution right now. So just as we were getting into the war, Russia was getting out of the war. You remember that most of Europe had gone through revolutions in the 1800s and the 1700s. They had gone away from having kings and queens and going to a more democratic kind of government. We kind of started that revolution back in 1775, 76, and the European countries kind of followed after us, having their own little revolutions. But Russia had not had a revolution yet. They had still had a king and a queen. They called them czars, and they still had a czar in 1917. When they had their revolution, the people, the workers, were tired of having a king and a queen to tell them what to do. They didn't go in the direction that we went and other European countries had gone, which was towards more democracy. They wanted to go towards a new idea that had been, I didn't even say invented, but kind of invented just a few decades earlier by a guy named Karl Marx. And the idea was communism. And they thought this was the new wave. The 1700s, 1800s were all about going towards democracy. Well, this was all about going towards communism, sharing things equally, workers' rights. That was, they thought, the next step in human evolution. And the guy you see over here on the side, that's Vladimir Lenin. And Lenin leads the workers to revolt against the Tsar, and they clean house, and they get rid of all their royalty, and they decide to go in this direction where people share things equally. The state controls everything, and the state then divides it equally amongst everyone, so that the workers are the ones who are in control. That's the theory, at least. We know that it didn't work out so great for most workers. But in the 20th century, that's a late discovery. We don't figure that out right away. In fact, in our own country, there's going to be a huge push after Russia has their revolution towards communism to have our own little revolution. People were saying, "Hey, we need to go in this direction that Russia is going to go in. They're doing the right things. Their workers are protected, and they get a share in the wealth of the country, and not just the really, really rich." And some people in our own country go in that direction. And actually, after the Great Depression and during the Great Depression, a lot of people thought this was the future for America, was to go towards communism. So Russia gets out of the war because they are dealing with their own revolution, and they don't want to deal with having to send any more troops into Europe's wars. They want to have a communist revolution. So they get out, we get in. Well, what is the war like in World War I? One feature of the war is what we call trench warfare. And you see a picture here on the side of the screen of what it looks like. They dug themselves deep into the dirt, and they barricaded themselves here, and they would fire and shoot from these trenches. And this kind of warfare just led to a lot of ties, a lot of not much progress. They were just shooting a little bit, people died, but not a lot of advancement. People dug in and they didn't really move. and living in these trenches for a long period of time. There's lots of good images you can see online about it, but brutal conditions. They usually filled up with water, and they would have rats in these trenches, and it was a very unpleasant place to be. But people would spend um, pretty much the whole war in these trenches, and you wouldn't make much progress. When you dug in like this, you were there to stay. And these trenches, a lot of them are still in Europe. You can see them today. They scar the land. And another aspect of then this warfare is what we call no man's land. Between the two trenches, there was a bunch of land that got completely destroyed from bombs and guns and all kinds of weapons, and nobody really could live there now or then, and that you couldn't advance through it, right? So if you had one group of people on one side, one group on the other side, the area between was decimated, and you couldn't advance through it. It was hard to make rushes through this kind of terrain, and it just led to a lot of stalemates, a lot of just no one making really any progress. So a lot of dying, but not a lot of progress in this whole kind of thing. And one aspect of the war that made it even more brutal was the introduction of chemical warfare. Here you see a lot of guys with masks on, and World War I, chemicals are used in the fighting, and things like mustard gas and other kinds of chlorine and those kind of things were used to kill people. And at first we didn't know exactly how deadly it was. It was painful, but things that it would create after you inhaled it were sort of the problems. The cancers that would come afterwards, the conditions in your lungs that would come afterwards, asthma and that kind of stuff. That's where it was long-term effects. And obviously painful in the moment, but then when you're done, you're not really done with it. You still have to deal with the chemical effects of all of that. So you can imagine being stuck in these trenches, and chemicals are wafting towards you, nowhere to go. You've got to get your mask on just in time to avoid all that kind of stuff. Well, it leads to not much progress, like I've said before. And so in 1919, Germany says, you know what, no one's winning this war, and we're definitely not winning it. Let's have an armistice. And he calls on Woodrow Wilson, our president, to negotiate a peace between all of the parties. And Woodrow Wilson, our president, becomes sort of the leading figure in the peace process of figuring out who gets what, how do we de-escalate the war. This is a war where none of us are really winning, and Germany said they're the first ones to say we're done, and they want out of it. And so when they ask Woodrow Wilson for peace, they are kind of saying we give up. And so we'll talk about the conditions of the peace a little bit later, but for today, the key things we want to mention are just how brutal and terrible this kind of warfare was. Not a lot of glory in this kind of warfare, just a lot of sitting around, shooting a little bit, but basically just waiting around, and sometimes it felt like waiting around to die. You felt like you were powerless in this kind of fighting. You just had to sit around and take whatever came your way. So not a glorious war, and certainly very costly in terms of human life. All right, have a good day. Keep on your reading, and I will see you on Friday.